Okay. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate you getting on the line. I understand that there are some questions regarding the budget process that took place over the past 2 days. And as everyone is aware, as a result of the budget that was passed earlier today by the mayor and city council, we are going to see some fundamental changes here at the police department, changes that we've not seen in my 30 years since I've been here. And this will be due to both the budget cuts that were made to the police department, as well as the plan that is in place to re-envision and to look at how we do policing in the future. With the reduction of 150 police officer positions in the Austin Police Department, we will go back to a staffing level that we were at back in 2015. So this will require some work with me and my team to address that staffing level so that we can ensure that we provide the highest level of public safety that we can to the community. Our patrol has always been our priority, our ability to respond to 911 calls for service. And although we've been challenged over the past couple of years with response times not meeting our goals, we will continue to strive towards meeting those goals, and we will ensure that our patrol bureau is staffed accordingly, even with these cuts. This will require us to move officers out of specialized assignments and units and potentially impact the operations there. But it's important for the community to understand that we will ensure that our patrol functions remain at full staffing at the levels that we're at today so that we can ensure our ability to respond to those 911 and 311 calls for service. In addition to the changes that were made to staffing levels, there are also many considerations that will be given to reimagining how the police department will operate in the future. How will we be structured? In particular, some of the units were identified to be looked at for moving potentially to another city structure, another city governance, or to determine if those services should even be provided by the police department any longer. I have said often, as have many police leaders, that oftentimes police officers are sent to situations for which we're not always the best trained or the best equipped. We're just simply the only ones available. And we have wanted that alternative response, especially in those calls involving mental health. So I look forward to improvements in our mental health services and our mental health response protocols that will allow for that to take place. But on top of that, there are many other units and divisions that have been put up for consideration as far as potentially moving under another structure. Those include the forensics lab, the 911 lab, the 911 call center, some of our support services and strategic services, our internal affairs, special investigations unit. So these are all conversations that are going to take place and decisions that will be made in the coming months. The city has a task force that's been put together to look at these issues, to look at what other structures might be put in place to handle this. And as a police department, our role will be to implement the changes as they are designed and as those decisions are made. There are also other things that will be under consideration to determine if we would still perform those functions or if those functions would go over to other entities as well. Again, we're only hours after the budget passing. My team and I and others were still looking at the impacts of all of the budgetary decisions. The most significant will be the reduction in staffing, and that will be the one that we address first. But again, we're only hours into this budget, and we will be making decisions on which officers will potentially have to transfer out of their units and back into patrol. Again, understanding that patrol is our priority, and we want to ensure our ability to respond to those 911 and 311 calls for service. So with that, I will open it up for questions at this time. But again, I want to ensure this community that if you call 911, our officers will respond. That is one thing I know is the hearts and minds of our police officers, and they are committed to serve this community. And I do not expect that to change. And we will ensure that we do everything we can to have adequate resources on patrol to address those calls for service.
Chief Brian Manley, it's Jordan Bonnke at CBS Austin. I wanted to see if you had any comment on the proposal from the city to demolish or get rid of the APD headquarters and use it for something else.
So the headquarters, it's where I'm at right now, actually. This building has been under consideration for being actually demolished and redeveloped for quite some time. We've actually gone through exercises in the past where we've designed what a new police headquarters would look like, and it's just never come to fruition. So as long as we find adequate housing for all of the staff that works out of headquarters. We have both headquarters functions here, as well as a couple of patrol divisions work out of this facility. So as long as we can find adequate location and space for us, then we would stand ready to participate in that process.
Hey, Chief, it's Chris Neely with Community Impact Newspaper. There's been a lot of talk about leadership and public safety leadership in the city, and the mayor has said time and time again that he's not calling for a change in chief, but he's calling for a chief that will champion change and will be willing to move this change forward that the community is asking for. Do you see yourself as that chief?
Absolutely. I think that we have a history at this police department. One of the things I'm proud of is the work that the men and women at the Austin Police Department have done in advancing change. If you look at some of the accomplishments, especially with policy changes we've made to cite and release, trying to minimize the arrest for low-level violations, work we've done with the juvenile curfew because we realized the impacts that had in certain parts of our community. And there are many other examples where we have moved forward what we think are progressive advances in policing. And I know the men and women of the Austin Police Department will continue to do that.
Chief, this is Audrey with KUT Austin. After the vote on these cuts, do you have any plans to resign?
This isn't about me and my plans. This is about our community who needs a police department that can provide them the level of services that they deserve. And it's about the men and women of the Austin Police Department that I'm privileged to be with and have spent my career with that deserve a department and a community that supports them. So that's the focus.
Hello, Chief.
Yes.
Hi, Tony Cantu with Patch. I'm sorry. Chief, one of the things that I've noticed, one of the talking points as we experience this new civil call, unrest, the call for reform and such, I've noticed that one of the main points is to have police respond rather than patrolling. You mentioned earlier that you're going to ensure that all the patrols are still in place, but is this across the board, or will you also reimagine areas, perhaps sectors of the city where that's not needed unless police are called by residents whose taxes in fact pay the salaries of officers?
So I can't imagine we would ever have a part of our city that didn't need to be serviced by patrol, just routine patrol, just driving through, so that we have the opportunity to know those residents and they know that we are looking out for their safety. What we regularly do, though, is set boundaries for our patrol districts to ensure that we're balancing the call loads and we're balancing the number of officers that are assigned to each of those districts so that we can maintain those response times. So that work will continue as we reevaluate the call demand. And if future changes that we make as a police department impact the calls that come in and the demands on our services, then we'll rebalance again to make sure that we're providing that level of service across the city.
Thank you, Chief.
Hey, Chief, this is Austin Sanders with the Chronicle. I want to follow up on the leadership question. So if you see yourself as the progressive chief that council and advocates are calling for, clearly, very many of them don't see you as that person. So how do you plan to win back that trust of the advocacy groups and council?
Again, I think that our department has a history of advancing progressive policy and of outreach to the community and building relationships. I understand there's been some strain to those relationships as of late. I'm well aware of concerns that have been expressed about my leadership. I have remained committed to moving this police department forward in those ways that I think are appropriate. But I also think that it should be expected that a police chief would express their concerns based on their experience and really education in this area, so that those that are making decisions for our community are making decisions that are at least informed by their public safety leaders. So I have always seen my role as one of informing those that are making the decisions, but then of carrying out the decisions once they're made.
Hey,
Chief, sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, hey, this is Jacqueline with KXAN. One of the people who are affected by this budget change are people who are expected to be cadets in the next classes, and some of them have, moved from other places and sacrificed some things. So you're wondering what happens in these situations? Would they be compensated in any way or helped, or is this just a no-win situation?
So we have reached out to all of the cadets that were supposed to be in the July class that then got pushed to November. And now, of course, we're not sure when that class may begin. We've reached out to each and every one of them. The ones that have moved to Austin, we have engaged with them on what their employment status is right now. And there are several of them that we are going to bring into the department as temporary employees in places where we can find work for them to do. Again, because they gave up jobs and employment and a salary in other places coming here in the expectation of a job. So we're going to do everything we can to help them while we await the beginning of their cadet class.
Howdy, Chief. John Cooley, News Radio KLBJ here. I apologize for showing up late. And I apologize if you actually addressed this earlier, but following the decisions and the comments made during the City Council's meeting over the budget from council members themselves and the public, how do these decisions make you feel as APD's leader right now?
John, this isn't about feelings. This is about the work that lies ahead of us. I did outline earlier the challenges that are posed by some of these cuts. And then I also outlined the steps that we're going to take to address those to ensure that we continue to provide adequate frontline services for those that call 911 or 311 in need of help. Well, we also look to redesign the parts of the department that are going to be evaluated over the next 6 months to a year in the plan that was put forth by mayor and council and under the leadership of the city manager and the deputy city manager and the reimagined process.
Chief Manley, part of the service that APD provides is a security detail for some of our other public officials. Is there any plan right now to change the security detail for council members?
There are no plans for that right now. We have many units that will be under consideration as we figure where we will pull officers from. Again, we're going to have to move officers out of specialized details to put them into the patrol function so we can maintain adequate resources on patrol. That is one unit among many that will be looked at, and those units are selected based on the frontline services that they perform or the support services that they perform for patrol.
Hey, Chief, it's Chris Neal again with Community Impact. I know you said at the top of the questions that, this isn't really about you and the changes to, the budget and re-envisioning public safety aren't about you. And I appreciate that, but I think there are a lot of people in the community who are curious about what your plans are amid these calls to resign and amid calls for your support too. So I'm just curious if you can give us any sort of insight into where your head is at.
Sure. My plans right now are to digest the changes that just were put forth by council in this budget and to lead this department in putting a plan together to address those changes. Those are my immediate plans.
We'll take one last question.
Chief, this is Kevin Clark with KXAN. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just joined the call. I had just gotten off the phone with one of those would-be cadets in the class, and that person just talked about the frustration and knowing a lot of the other people, some of them who were in active duty military, some of them who moved from states like California and Washington, D.C., Florida, to come down here only to learn they won't be able to participate and may even be looking to change careers now. Anything you want to say to them? And I know certainly this wasn't your own doing, but is there any possible compensation for those people? What kind of happens to them now?
So I did go through earlier that we have reached out to each of those cadets, especially those that have already moved here, to talk to them about employment status. And we actually have offered temporary positions in the police department to several of those that needed it so that we could, again, help them support themselves and their families while we await the start of the next cadet class. This is not a position that anyone wanted to be in. We were unaware that we were going to have a delay in this class, and we already had, obviously, cadets that moved here. This is not good for us as an agency. agency. It is not good for those cadets and their families, and it's not good for the reputation of the Austin Police Department in the recruiting circles. But we are where we are, and we're going to do everything we can to help those cadets that had already moved here during this period until the cadet class starts.
Thank you so much, Chief. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.